Hello and welcome to Model Aviation Live. I'm your host, Jay Smith. Hopefully I look familiar to you. If you're a reader of Model Aviation Magazine or Park Pilot Magazine, you'll know me as the executive editor. I have a column in both of those publications. And I want to share with you, since this is our first show, I guess a little bit of housekeeping items. So firstly, I chose to wear a hat today because I have not yet gotten my hair cut since the start of the pandemic. So at this point, it's been about 4 months since I've had a haircut. And if you happen to tune in to AMA Air on Wednesday, I was not wearing a hat, and I was told by Claire, one of the hosts, that I looked like a character from Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, which certainly is a compliment. But today I decided to put on a hat, and I also want to share a little bit about where I am. So I'm not in the office. I'm not at AMA. I'm actually at home in my arcade. So basically, I turned a family room in my home into a home arcade. So you can't really see it too well. But if you look at the picture on screen, I'm surrounded by arcade machines and pinball machines, which is another hobby of mine. And also, if you notice the airplane I'm holding, the Cherokee, that was on the cover of the January 2019 issue of Model Aviation, which was our redesign issue. And I'm very excited to share with you that this issue, our redesign issue, just won an award from the Association in Media and Publishing. It's called the Excel Awards, and we won a silver level prize for best redesign. So I'm really excited for that, for our magazine, for everyone that works on our magazine, for our members, for our readers. I wanted to just share that exciting tidbit with you that we found out on Tuesday that we won this award. So, and that airplane I did the review on, and it's just off camera. I still fly it, and it's sitting on one of my pinball machines just off camera. Another thing I want to share with you is you might be thinking that why do I have a plunger pointed at me? And I have to think about things are backwards. So I want to point that way, but it's actually right there. So if you're wondering why there's a plunger pointed at me, it's because there's a full-size Dalek next to me. I'm a big fan of Doctor Who, and I have a full-size Dalek, which is radio controlled. You can see it in that picture in the background. And just to add to that, I also have a model of one here. So let me turn it around. And so this is what's right there, right next to me, pointing at me. So just, a little information about what's in the background. And then I have a neon sign behind me that says "Back to the Arcade." So this is the room where I do work on a lot of my airplanes. Sometimes I store airplanes in here, as you can kind of see in the background. And I also play pinball and arcade games in here. So just a little bit of information for when you watch the show, where I'm coming from. A quick look here. We've got some people that have already checked in. Thank you so much for joining us. We actually have a gentleman online who is reaching out to us from Bavaria, Germany. Thank you so much for joining, Charlie. I have to tell you, I was stationed in Germany in the United States Army. I was stationed in Gießen, and my company was headquartered in for a while in Kirschgoens, and then later they were in Wiesbaden. So thank you so much for tuning in. Somebody just asked me if my Dalek says exterminate. As a matter of fact, it does. So basically my Dalek is connected to my phone through Bluetooth, and I can play phrases from the TV show on the Dalek, and the eye lights blink. And as I said, he's fully radio controlled. I don't get inside. So the plunger arm can move, and I can drive it around. It's basically built upon a powered scooter. So anyway, so now that we've talked about that, well, we were talking about Doctor Who for a minute and TV. I want to share with you that in my July column in the magazine, I talked about aircraft being used in TV and movies. And I talked specifically about Dave Platt, who built models for the Battle of Britain movie. And I was sharing with you that I want to hear more about people who've worked on TV and movies and built model aircraft or flown model aircraft. And specifically, I also mentioned for the Battle of Britain that I just recently purchased a screen-used uniform from Pilot Sergeant Andy Moore, who was played by Ian McShane. So I was really excited to get that. There's a picture you can see now. This is the actual uniform that he wore in the Battle of Britain. So it kind of was timely when I talked about the Battle of Britain with Dave Platt. So if anybody who is watching this either live or after the fact, if you have any stories about being involved in any movie, I've heard some stories about Blue Thunder. I've heard some movies about or some stories about other movies and TV shows. Right now, I'm talking to about 6 AMA members who have built or flown models in movies and TV shows like Dunkirk. So if anybody's watching either now live or later, and you have had any involvement, or maybe you have friends like that have been involved, please reach out to me, because I want to do an article about this, about how models are used in movie and TV. So definitely, please, if you have any information, if you have any pictures, if you have any videos, please definitely reach out and share that information with me. Now, I also want to share that every time we do the show, which is monthly, we're going to have a guest. And this month, I'm very excited to bring Greg Gimlick as our guest. And he is our Model Aviation electric columnist. He was our columnist even before I started. I've been with AMA 12 years last month, so Greg has done that for us. He's also been our park pilot helicopter columnist, and he served on our publications committee in the past. So welcome, Greg.
Hey, glad to be here, Jay. Good to see you in person almost.
Yeah, it's good to see you as well. So, Greg, I'm obviously wearing my U.S. Army hat. I mentioned that I was in the Army and I was stationed in Germany and Bosnia and Alabama. And you too are a veteran. So, firstly, thank you for your service. And do you mind telling everybody a little bit about what you did in the military?
I spent my whole career flying Army helicopters. I was one of those basic training, straight into flight school types, and spent my whole career in helicopters. Started off in Hueys, like most people, or OH-13s, and ended up retiring from an Apache battalion. So I got to see a whole lot of change over the years. Got to fly a lot of neat stuff, meet an awful lot of great people. So that was kind of where my helicopter side came from. Yeah.
Awesome. Which one was your favorite helicopter to fly?
I have to say a Huey. I don't know.
Right.
We used to kid when we take the last Apache to the graveyard, we'll fly the crew back in a Huey. So you can't beat the new aircraft. I got a couple hours in the latest model Apache simulator about a year ago, and it's a young man's game now. It's so technical. These guys, I call them kids. These guys and gals are just so incredibly talented and busy in the cockpit. My hat goes off to them.
Well, Hueys are awesome. I want to share a really quick story. A few years ago at IRCHA, there was a Huey there, and they were charging for rides, and I paid to go for a ride in it because it's my favorite helicopter. And it just turned out they loaded us in like a bench seat, and I think there was like 4 of us on each side, and I was dead center with the door open for the whole flight. So they flew all over AMA, and they flew over the reservoir, which is a large body of water very close to AMA. And we did some pretty good banking turns. And it was just really thrilling to finally fly in a Huey, because I've appreciated that helicopter, for so long. And so I'm sure flying one, I mean, that's definitely taken it to the next level.
It was a lot of fun, I have to say. I enjoyed my career, and sometimes it's important to know when it's time to retire and time to go and let the young guys take over. If they took old men, I'd still be there flying helicopters. I was an instructor pilot for the majority of my career, and I just really enjoyed the whole training side of it. I loved it. Yeah, sure did.
Well, we appreciate everybody that served. I see a comment on here: too much Army. Well, we appreciate everyone who served in the military for sure. So thank you to everyone who watches this for your military service. And so, Greg, let's talk a little bit about your contributions and your more recent contributions. And we have another person who is joining us live, who I can see has said hello, and that's John Barnes. So John's out in California. Yeah, John's out in California, and he's done a lot of articles and reviews for us. And a real quick story. I worked with John on RC groups. So before I started at AMA, I actually did articles for RC groups, and John was one of the people who worked, doing reviews for RC groups. So when I came on board with AMA, I told John that I thought he did such a great job with his photography and his writing that I wanted him to work for us. So he came on. Initially, he was writing for Sport Aviator, and then later Park Pilot and Model Aviation. and he's done countless articles for us and reviews. He does great video work. So John, thank you for all you've done for the magazine. Thanks for joining in. And Greg, how long have you written for Model Aviation?
I think this year was 15 years, I think.
Okay.
I came on right after when Bob Kopsky retired. Bob Hunt called me and said, Bob's retiring. Do you want to come in and take over that column? And at the time, I wasn't doing a column for any of the magazines, and I really liked the job. So I thought, yeah, my first instinct was to say, absolutely, I want to do it. My second instinct was to say, how do you follow Bob Kopsky?
Right.
And I don't know that I've followed him yet, to tell you the truth. He was the one that got me educated on electrics right from the start. So yeah, 15 years here, and then previous years I was at Model Airplane News, Sailplane Electric Flyer, RC Report, back to Model Airplane News. So I've been doing columns, I guess, for about 25 years, maybe, close to that.
I don't think I've ever talked to you about this, so this is going to be a first, probably live right here today. But I believe the first time I ever met you was at CEF. Before I worked for AMA, you were there covering the event, and I went to CEF every year, which, for those that don't know, that's the Southeast Electric Flight Festival, which takes place in Georgia at Mac Hodges Field, which was previously Hodges Hobbies. And I attended every CEF at Hodges Hobbies. I did not go to the first one, which was not at Hodges, but I attended every CEF for, I think, 10-ish years with my father until I came to work for AMA. So I believe, Greg, the first place I ever met you is you were at CEF, and you were covering it for Model Aviation magazine.
Yeah, it could have been. I can't remember. I covered it every year for about the first year when we were off-site, off of Mac's place. We didn't cover it. We were just there to kind of see, is this going to be something? And it obviously was something. So about 4, 5, 6 years afterwards, I guess I covered it every year for one of the magazines.
Right. Yeah. Well, I always enjoyed going there. Before I moved to Muncie, Indiana, I lived in Florida, and so it was only about a 5-hour drive, and it was a great time for me and my father to go on a road trip together and enjoy electric flight. And for those that don't know, when I was growing up, my father owned a hobby shop. So my father has been involved in cars and boats and rockets and plastic models and slot cars and all those things. And so it was a great opportunity for both of us to enjoy electric flight. And just as a quick side note, I got him back into flying with electrics, and it was actually with a GWS slow stick. And so basically we were at the flying field, and I kept trying to hand him the radio, and he hadn't flown in a while. And I said, it's super easy. It's just 3-channel. It's no problem. And he's like, I don't know. And so I kind of gently gave him the radio and said, well, it's yours. You got to fly it. And I just stepped away, close enough that I could take the radio if I needed to, but I just stepped a pace or two away. And he just immediately, it just comes right back to you like riding a bike. And he immediately flew it. He had no problems. He flew it for the rest of the flight. He landed it. We were out at a very large field. There was no concerns. I could have taken back control, and he, it was, obviously not from a safety standpoint, but that's what he needed. He just needed for just a moment to, take control and know that he could still do this. And the next day he asked me, what was that plane again? And I said it was a GWS slow stick, and he bought one. And since then, he's been the club president in Florida at his club. He's been the safety officer. He went to CEF with me. So, it's really great to bring him back into the hobby in that way and have that camaraderie with him. And, I don't want to, we have a lot of other things to talk about. Well, one really other quick thing I want to share about CEF is I was involved in the world record attempt, which we set a world record at that time. It was 99 airplanes that flew at one time. And Tony Stillman, who is, currently working for AMA, at the time, he was the district VP, and he came and he certified it for the Guinness World Records. So I was flying a Spectrum transmitter on 2.4, and I was involved with the 99 people that I think there was about 110 that took off, but ultimately about 99 completed it. And the most interesting thing for me is they had us flying at different areas, different heights and different areas. and I was in the group that had to fly the highest. So we were told to land last, and I was one of the last in the group. So there was about 100 airplanes on the ground when I tried to land, and trying to find a place to land with 100 airplanes was very challenging. But
Yeah, I remember that.
I was flying a Searmark Little Banshee because it was small and very capable. And I have that plane. I've never gotten rid of it because, just memorable from that. And my father was my caller. So, and I still have the shirt, that we set a Guinness record. So I definitely have some fond memories of enjoying Seth and the hobby. But, I also want to talk to you, Greg, about some of your more recent articles. But before we do, let's just take a quick look and see if we have any other questions.
I saw Rachel asked if I'd ever done a scale helicopter, and yes, that's kind of where my interests lie, in the helicopter side. And I've done Hughes 500s, used a heli artist body, and mine was on the 250 T-Rex 250 chassis that I built that one from. Bell 47, I did out a little MCXP. I cut up one, and that was in one of my columns in Park Pilot. And when Horizon had their Apache, I had that. Of course, it's not one I built. It came out ready to fly, and that was a beautiful. I hated to fly because I was afraid I was going to damage it. It was just such a really nice model. But yeah, that's the scale helicopters is my interest. I was never a 3D helicopter flyer. I'm not that good. So the scale falls into my interest and abilities.
Well, I'm going to address really quick. There's a question here from Michael, and he says, "What's up with freestyle quadcopters? I heard you all turned your back on them. Is that true?" Well, that is definitely not true. We do still support multirotors and quadcopters, and in fact, Matt Ruddick, who is the host of AMA Air, and he also does the podcast, he's actually helping in the background for the show. He's helping us with comments, and he's helping us produce this show. So he hears what I'm saying, but obviously he can't speak to you. But I want to share with you that is his passion, that freestyle quadcopters is his passion, and he flies them all the time at AMA. And both him and Dylan, who also works on the magazine, works on digital and works on AMA Air, both of them, and also Kyle Jarris, who is our education director. All three of those people, I want to comment, are very involved with multirotors, with freestyle. So no, AMA is supporting freestyle. AMA is supporting multirotors, whether it be for multirotor racing or freestyle. So just wanted to quickly answer that question. And so let's touch base, Greg, about a couple of articles you recently wrote. So in our July issue, which members and readers should have already seen, you did an article about power recommendations. Can you kind of share, for those that haven't seen it, what the focus of that article was?
Well, I kind of talked about most of the airplanes now. The manufacturers have really, bought into the electric side of things. So when you get things, there's generally power recommendations, and 90% of those are accurate, work well, and most of the time you're best just following those recommendations. But there's times that doesn't apply, whether it's a model you've built or you're converting over from gas or glow, or just something that, like the one I referenced in the column, was a Bristol from Seagull Models, and it was a large-scale Bristol I did for a review. And I started off, I was going to use their recommendation, and it was clear that would fly the airplane well enough, but I've built a couple of Bristols in the past, and World War I airplanes, they're short nosed, and it's tough getting weight up front, and I knew I was going to have to add some weight, so I bolted up the stock electric system that they recommended, and I started adding weight to get it to balance, and it was going to get heavier and heavier and heavier to get that weight up front. And if I'm going to add weight, I would rather add batteries to do weight. When I'm producing power, I prefer to use voltage over current. The power reduces drastically as current goes up. So I like to use a higher voltage. So rather than an 8 or a 10S system that's recommended, I decided to go with a 12S. I actually doubled the duration by doing so because my current dropped so drastically. I'm only flying. pull about 44 amps, if I recall, on a full throttle, and I putz around with the airplane at about 20 amps. So 15, 16 minutes is easily done. So that brought up some questions, and people started asking me, why did you go 12S instead of the 8S? And so I thought maybe an article to clarify some of that would be in order, and I think it did. I've spent an awful lot of time since it came out answering emails, which is a good thing. But a lot of people seem to have missed the point over the years that, higher voltage pays dividends, and you can do the higher voltage really without a big weight penalty, because since you're using lower current rather than, say, a 5,000 milliamp battery, you could drop back to a lighter 3,300 milliamp battery, still have good duration, and achieve what we did. So that was the direction I took. And, for the old guys in the crowd who remember Tom Hunt from many years ago, and Tom Hunt is the power behind Neat Fair in the Northeast, the biggest electric meet around forever. And years and years ago, Tom said, I wish we could do the high voltage and lower current. I wish we could do that. But at the time, with the NiCad cells and then nickel metals, it just wasn't feasible to get there. And there were also some equipment limitations with controllers and stuff at the time. So, but now with the LiPos and the modern controllers and everything, it's just so easy to do the higher voltage and lower current. So I kind of went that way. I also explained how to kind of convert from power-wise when they say use a 20 cc gas engine, and somebody says, what's that as an electric and motor. So there's some rules of thumb that I put in the article to help convert, and if you're going from a gas engine, say a 20 cc, figure out how many cubic inches that is, which I can't remember off the top of my head, 1.2 or somewhere in there. I don't remember now. But Lucian Miller is a wealth of information. Lucian is the power behind Cobra Motors, Badass Motors from Innovative Designs. And he has these formulas that he's done all the data for. They work so well. And a gas engine, if you take, say, a 1 cubic inch gas engine, say, just for example, and figure about 1,500 watts per cubic inch from gas over electric. So that, okay, if it calls for a 1 cubic inch gas engine, a 1,500 watt electric motor would handle it, and that sort of thing. And it's like 2,000 watts for a cubic inch glow motor. They're a higher power density engine and that. So I kind of just stepped into some of those things, and I try not to bury people in mathematics and formulas and all that stuff, but try to come up with rules of thumb that people have used. And I can't claim I came up with these. They're just people I know who are smarter than I, and they share it, and I try to just share it in the articles and columns.
When you talked about trying to determine the equivalent size of a gas or glow motor, I think depending on how motors are named, it can be easier or harder. Like, for instance, the E-Flight line of motors, I think they do a good job of kind of giving you the equivalent. But could you explain for people that don't know, if they don't use the equivalent, there's other numbers involved, and could you kind of explain what that means?
Oh, okay. Yeah, the numbers have done well. Bob Boucher of Astroflight first started with that to try to, back before we had brushless back in his Cobalt line, started trying to equate them and number them accordingly. The other way you'll see things listed, you might see a 5025/15 motor or something, and after the slash, various manufacturers use various things. There's never been a standard, never will be. I've given up after 20 plus 5 years, whatever, begging for standards. But the motor designators, if you see them like a 5025, that'll be the length and the diameter. And just to make it more complicated, some manufacturers use the length and diameter as that of the case of the motor, and some use it as the stator of the motor, which is where the windings are inside. So again, that becomes something else that can confuse people. Some websites are excellent at making that comparison and breaking it down. And again, reference back to Lucian Miller, because he's got so many charts and so much data on his site, and he's got cross-reference charts. So if you are looking at a particular motor size to equal a 40 size glow engine, okay, these motors and these are called such and such, and they measure. I mentioned the number after the slash. Sometimes that's the number of windings on a stator, and sometimes it's the kV of a motor. And the kV, very simply, is how many thousand RPMs it turns, or how many RPMs it turns per volt that you apply to the motor. So, if you see one that's listed as a 1200 kV, in a perfect world without friction, without losses, without anything, if you put 1 volt to that motor, it would turn 1200 RPM. There are some around who say that's the only number you need to know. My counter to that, when I try to counter it, is I've got a couple of motors out in the shop. One is the size of a fist. It's a big motor. The other is about the size of the end of a finger, and they've got the exact same kV. Obviously, they won't fly the same airplane. So there's more to it than kV, although kV is important. But
Absolutely. So I know for those that are watching that don't know it, that you only fly electrics now. And
right.
How long ago did you make that conversion to only electric?
29 years.
Wow, yeah, 29 years.
Yeah, 29 years. I came into it accidentally. I flew glow and gas, and a friend of mine walked into my shop one day, threw this J3 Cub on my floor and said, "This crap won't fly." And he stormed out. He said, "Keep it." And it was a very early electric Cub from Hobbyco with a 6-cell NiCad battery and a 15-minute time charger. So I gave that a try. I fixed it up. I took it out, didn't know anything about the electrics, and took it out, and it waffled around okay. And I thought, boy, this is kind of neat. It's quiet. It was very easy to do. It was underpowered, but it showed me something that interested me, and I was getting a little bored with the hobby at the time. So I dug in, found that there was a 10-part article by Bob Kopsky at the time. He did 10 consecutive columns all about electrics, and I dove into that. I drove up to Pennsylvania to the old KRC meet and met Keith Shaw, who's kind of our father of electrics. I met Bob Kopsky and some others up there who were willing to talk to me, and got a crash course in it. So I did a gas engine about a year ago just for fun, but I'm all electric for 29 years. That's my love.
Well, while you were talking, Greg, I kind of quickly glanced down, and there was a comment from Victor about brushed motors, nickel metal hydride, and NiCad batteries. So I can share a really quick story. I think the first electric I ever flew was a Gentle Lady glider, but back then it was either full throttle or no throttle. There was no speed control. And then more recently, my first electric was a GWS Tiger Moth, and that was brushed. And that used both NiCad and nickel metal hydride. I had a combination of the two batteries. And I don't know, I want to say that was going back about 18 years ago, maybe. I love biplanes. And Chris Cianelli, who I know you know, Greg, he had a radio controlled hobby show. And I saw the show on cable. And he did a whole show about electrics. And I was like, I want to get into electrics. And so the next day I went to the hobby shop that my father owned. And Backyard Flyer, the brand new Backyard Flyer, the first issue, had a review of the GWS Tiger Moth by Chris Cianelli. I mean, it was like a strange coincidence. And so I already had my radio and I had some gear. So I bought the GWS Tiger Moth. And then back then, GWS would sell like a package that had the battery and the servos and the speed control, and like a flight pack. And so I started out with a GWS Tiger Moth. And what a fantastic airplane. And then over time, I converted it to brushless. We used a motor out of a CD-ROM drive. So my first brushless motor in my Tiger Moth was literally a CD-ROM drive motor. And eventually I bought some LiPo batteries at Ceph and used those in it. So, I kept getting it lighter, and I kept getting the flight times longer. And it turns out that I would later fly the GWS World Tour Tiger Moth that currently resides in the National Model Aviation Museum. I actually patented that Tiger Moth, but it started out with me getting a GWS Tiger Moth to get into electric flight.
Wow, that's neat. Yeah, Chris was quite a character. He was a lot of fun. It was a shame when he passed, but he was the energy in the room when he was there, and that. And yeah, we all used the old Mabuchi can motors back in the early days of electric. That's all we had until you stepped up to like an Astro Cobalt motor. And guys like Tom Hunt were doing gearboxes where we were gearing up two 600 size can motors, and it started out, everybody was doing direct drive. Then we went to gear drives because, you could get those big props on there and drop the RPM down and go deeper pitch. And it was just, it was very magical back in those days. A lot of experimentation. And of course, we didn't have the ARFs that we could pick up with power systems all designed. It was a free exchange of information at these big electric flies. And it was a good time to get involved with it, and I still enjoy it. It's a lot easier now in many ways, and maybe a little more confusing because we have so many options. We didn't used to have options before. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we get into another article that you wrote, I saw that Mason Hutchinson has joined us, so appreciate him being on. And he stated that he really likes the content in Model Aviation and asked about how that comes about. Is there a master plan? So there is, to a degree. We do have themed issues. The October issue, for example, is always the build issue. So I'm always thinking about, I basically wanted that issue to look much like you would if you picked up Model Aviation in the 70s or 80s, before we had ARFs and before we had Ready to Flies. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, the whole issue dedicated to building. So the reviews would be strictly on kits, and there would be how-to articles, and there would be construction articles. But we've had themed issues on World War I. We've had themed issues on electrics, jets. I mean, we've done a lot of themed issues. But beyond that, there is other things that that I work towards. And so sometimes I'll think about an article that I want, and I'll reach out to someone, or maybe I write it myself. But other times I'll have contributors such as Greg reach out to me. So that's kind of the perfect segue, because the second article that we're going to talk about, Greg reached out to me and said, hey, I've got a Dremel 580 table saw, and that's a workhorse of the hobby, and I completely refurbished it, and I took it from non-working to working, and I think that it would be an interesting article for our readership. So for those that aren't familiar, other than the intro I just gave it, can you give a little bit more backstory on the Dremel 580 for us, Greg?
Oh, gee, the Dremel table saw, it's a small, and it's bolted to the top of my bench out in the shop, but it's a small table saw. It's just perfect for modeling. Oh, there's a picture of it, yeah. And they were around for years, and Dremel eventually dropped them. And these things are still, they've got a cult following. You can get online and start Googling them, and you'll find different websites where guys are looking for parts, making parts. And if you'll see on that photo, you'll see two aftermarket parts there. And I'll mention those in a second. But these saws, if you go to swap meets, you'll find them under tables full of cobwebs and rats' nests and everything else. And guys will scramble for them. The prices they're bringing are kind of surprising at some of the swap meets, but they're very rebuildable. If you keep in mind that they're not, a table saw that you're going to cut 2x4s with, but for the stock that we use for our airplanes, cutting spruce spars and all that sort of thing, they're just wonderful. They're great machines. They had a couple of basic flaws, and one is that I addressed in the article is the back plate. They're open completely on the back when you buy one. And so there's nothing supporting the back end of the carriage assembly that has the motor and blade and all that. It's supported on the front but not in the back. So they were notorious for getting a wobble and being a little messy. There's an eBay seller, AC Rails, Bill is his name, who came up with this backplate. And the backplate not only allows you to attach a vacuum cleaner to it, but what it does is you take a little bracket off the back of the carriage assembly and it bolts direct to the backplate. So it ties the whole unit together, takes all the slop and wobble out of the blade, and really it transitions the saw to really something special. They made a 580 and a 585, and the only difference between the two is the shaft on the 585 motor happened to be a little larger diameter. I don't know if they went with a different manufacturer for the motor or just what happened there. So if you do rebuild one, if you get the 585 motor and you've got a 580, make sure you get the pulley too, because it's a different shaft size unless you can drill the other one out accurately and attach. But Bill makes these the fences, and this is the fence you saw in the photo, and it just really sits down well on the saw. It's more like a full-size table saw fence with micro adjustments here to get everything trued up. He also had an actual miter that works. And then he makes, I don't know if I can get this in there, this is a tray. If you've ever worked a table saw that uses a tray, and it goes into the top of the saw, and it just sits in. So your workpiece sits in here, and it goes across. And it makes very quick, accurate cuts. It keeps your fingers out of things. Worth its weight in gold. I mean, it's just his aftermarket parts are the best I've seen anywhere on the market. So Greg, go ahead.
So Greg's, for those that maybe don't have a table saw, or after they watch the program today or they read your article, they're thinking about it. For you in your shop, I mean, how big of a go-to item is this table saw, the 580? I mean, how often do you find you use it for aero modeling?
Whenever I'm doing anything that requires cutting plywood that's 1/8 inch or bigger, spruce spars, any hardwood pieces, and that, I jump on it all the time. For 1/4 inch balsas, square pieces, I cut all those by hand with miter boxes. I guess I'm old school that way. I've got a small miter box and a back saw, and I use that. But I like the table saw for the other pieces, especially if you're going to have to cut multiple pieces the same size. You can set up with a jig just to run 6 parts or whatever, however you need, and every one of them will be identical. I bought through Radical RC. He has some aftermarket blades that are carbide tip blades that are exceptional. He has also a plywood jig that when you buy the thing, it doesn't look like much, but when you put it together, if you're setting up your saw for the first time or you're tuning the saw, it makes it foolproof. It's a 15-minute job as opposed to 30 minutes of a zillion measurements and trying to adjust things. So, same if you're used to a full-size table saw, everything applies. I mean, my shop-size commercial table saw does the same things in the same way. It's not safe for small, tiny items. So, and then of course, small, tiny items use a push stick when you're putting things through, so you don't run your hands and that kind of thing. So, I use it quite often. I really do. Cutting 1/4 inch plywood, it's a lifesaver. It really is.
Well, I know that I've gotten some good feedback on the article, and you mentioned you got a lot of feedback on the power recommendations. Have you gotten much feedback on the table saw article?
It just came out in the digital edition. Yeah, I haven't gotten my print copy yet in the mail, so
right.
Haven't gotten anything yet. We'll see.
The print edition should be out probably in about 10 days or so.
Right.
But the digital,
I put links in the article because the hardest thing is just running down parts. So I tried to put links in the article for everywhere I went to get information and tips on how to do this or that,
right.
and aftermarket parts for it. So in the resources at the end of the article, hopefully it'll cover everything. I did notice I made a mistake on one of the links that's listed there, but it's listed actually twice. So if they go to the aftermarket place, they'll still get to the eBay seller that's there. So
I want to talk a little bit about what you've done for Park Pilot as the helicopter columnist. But before we jump into that, going back to what Mason asked about a master plan, one of the things an idea that I came up with just a few months back was the common questions. So in every issue of Model Aviation, go back about 4 issues or so, we are featuring a company who shares the most common questions they're asked. So like we've had high tech, and we've had Dubrow is we have an article for Dubrow, and we just Balsa USA, and it's interesting sometimes that ideas like that either come from conversations that I have with people. Like sometimes, like Greg and I have had conversations, and just something in a conversation, or maybe another contributor, and it comes out and says, "Oh, maybe we should share this information," or that it would be great to touch on this or that. So I kind of felt like with the common questions, because that's a newer feature in the magazine, and we're running it every month, is that if their support, their customer service, or their tech support is getting these questions, then obviously it's quite likely that the readership is going to have those questions. So basically, going back to a master plan, it's just basically trying to, as best possible, inform and instruct in regards to both our publications, and inform and instruct members. And when we were doing we do the themed issues, as I mentioned, and I put out a poll and asked what, you, the readers, pick what the theme issue is and how to. It won by a landslide. That people wanted to learn how to, and that's why it's also important in the October issue. So I'm always interested in new ideas for articles or topics or reviews. And so if anybody has ideas or suggestions for any of that, please reach out to me. And I think Mason, who asked that question, he has some interest in doing some articles around people's like their shops, kind of an RC digs, for lack of a better term. Where do you build? What's your build table, or what's your build area, or your shop, or because some people are building on like tray tables, and some people are building on their kitchen table, and some people have complete shops, well-stocked shops. And one of our former employees at AMA, his name's Jack Frost. I mean, you go into his shop, it almost looks like a hobby shop. He's got pegboards with extra parts, and so everybody's a little bit different. So that might be something that we do in the future, is kind of highlight different shops, and I think also in that you could give tips. People could give tips about what they find useful in their shop, or what's helpful. Like for instance, RTL fasteners, for example, they're going to have an article, a common questions article. And so, it's nice to have all that hardware on hand if you're building a model and you drop and lose a part, or maybe it's short one screw or one nut and you need it and the hobby shop's not open. So there's definitely a lot of neat ideas around that that I think could also be incorporated in that. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Greg, but we talked about the table saw being in your shop, and you're not in your shop at the moment, but generally, could you give us just a really brief, what is your shop? I mean, where do you build and work on your models?
Okay. My shop is about a 20 by 20 foot garage. I've got a high bench down the center that's probably 3 by 8 feet, and it's quite high. It's about 38 inches. I'm 6'4". I like to work standing up. So bending over as a backbreaker, that's where I frame things up. It's covered with, when I'm framing, I use ceiling tile. In the 2 by 4 foot ceiling tiles is what I frame on. I've got an L-shaped bench on the other side with a computer set up, hooked to the chargers, a charge station. I've got shop cabinets that I'm afraid probably look like a hobby shop inside. When you open them up, it's embarrassing because I tend to buy too much stuff just in case. So it's kind of a mess, but it's where I live. I love it out there. I've had as many as, I guess, 53 airplanes and helicopters in racks and hanging from ceilings and on shelves and that. So that's my world out there. And as far as you mentioned the ideas from a columnist and a grand plan columnist standpoint, which is much different from the seat you sit in. I'm very much reader driven. I adjust my content for the columns, whether it was a helicopter column or my electric column, on the reader questions that I receive via email and that. So, input's important. If we don't have the input, we don't really know what everybody's looking for. And we're a member magazine, so for me that's the important part. But yep, my big shop, and it's hot out there right now. That's the only problem.
Well, Greg, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have this show, is because I just kind of wanted to form a sense of community around the Model Aviation brand. I mean, obviously people call me, they email me, I talk to them at events, or I talk to them at AMA, but I really want to know, get the pulse, if you will, just like you're saying. I want to get the pulse of our readership and our members, and hear what they want and see what they want and see what resonates with them. Because at the end of the day, it's your magazine. It's a member magazine, right? And I work for you. I work for you, Greg, and I work for all the members, because it's a member benefit. The magazine is a member benefit, and I want to make it the best magazine I can. And I'm currently a life member of AMA, so I'm hugely supportive of AMA. I've been a member of the AMA for many, many years. All my flying friends down in Florida read my magazine, or I shouldn't say my magazine, the magazine, Model Aviation. And my father reads the magazine. And so, I definitely want to put out the best magazine I can. But I'll tell you, and I'm going to touch on something that someone asked about multi-rotor content. So the biggest challenge that I have, but I also think is what makes Model Aviation such a great magazine, is that we cover all aspects of aero modeling. We cover all the special interest groups. So we're not just focused on RC, or we're not just focused on, any given SIG. We cover free flight and control line and RC, and then all the different versions of those, and drones and helicopters. So one of the challenges I have is trying to balance that content. So, I want to point out, if people don't know, how I do that. And the biggest resource that I use to balance the content is that when you join AMA, it asks you what your primary and secondary interest is. So I'm constantly pulling reports to find out how many people are choosing, radio controlled, or how many people are choosing helicopters, or how many people are choosing multirotors, because I want to kind of tailor the content to the readership and what their primary interests are. But also, because we have to cover so many different aspects of aero modeling, it's not possible necessarily to get a lot of content from any specific special interest group in every issue. So as Rob Kurek, who's our director of publications, said to our members and to me several times, please don't judge us on a single issue. Give us a few issues to get that content in there. And that's another reason why we have columnists, because we have 29 different columns. Now, they don't run every issue of Model Aviation, but we literally have 29 different columns. And when we did our redesign, not the one that we did last year, but the previous one about 7 years ago, the company that came in to help us with the redesign said, you've got to get rid of all these columns. They said, that's not a thing anymore. And I said, you just don't understand our audience. It is a thing for us, because if we don't have feature articles, let's say, for instance, if we didn't have a feature article on control line carrier, as an example, but at least we have a column, so there's content in there. Or if it's not control line carrier, we have a control line column. So I want to make sure that we try to touch on all the special interests as much as possible. So there was a question in the comments specifically about multi-rotors, and right now we have an article underway about the mega class racing drones, which is the biggest drones you can have. And I believe some people refer to them as X class, but the new term is mega class. So there's an article underway with that. And we also intended to have an article about the Multi-GP International Open that was happening in August here at AMA, but that has since been canceled due to concerns around the pandemic. So definitely looking at having multi-rotor articles and looking for articles in all of the special interest groups. But also, I want to point out, too, that occasionally it can be challenging to find writers to write the articles or get the articles. And so maybe that's a good segue to talk about Park Pilot and as an example, and the helicopter column. So when Chris Mulcahy stepped down from the Park Pilot helicopter column, we were struggling finding a columnist that would be able to take over that column. And you stepped up and offered to do that. And you've done so, I think, for around 2 yeyears. And at this point,
5 years.
What's that?
Yeah, my 1 year stint turned into 5.
Yeah. And so you informed us that you'd kind of run the gambit of what you had to talk about and suggested we find another columnist. And so far we haven't been able to find a columnist. So I definitely want to ask people who are interested, please reach out if you're interested in writing an article for us, or if you have ideas for articles, or you have input. And so, like specifically with the Park Pilot Helicopter Columnist, we're looking for one. We'd love to continue to have helicopter content in Park Pilot. Maybe, Greg, if you could just kind of give an overview of your experience of the column and what it focuses on and what you tried to accomplish.
Well, I love a column. I mean, I've always preferred writing columns as to other sorts of things. And I had been an avid reader of Chris's column, both in Model Aviation and Park Pilot. And when he kind of wanted to slide out and spend more time on his larger helicopters and what he was doing there, I thought, well, I tinkered with helicopters. I flew them. I spent my life flying the real ones, and thought I could maybe fill in and try to do a little education from the aspect of a guy who's not a super 3D. I'm no Chris Mulcahy. I never will be. I mean, he just exemplifies the helicopter guys. But I wanted to give people a feeling like, you can start where I am and move forward and get better and learn the basics, and not, you don't need an aeronautical engineering degree in rotary wing aerodynamics, and just try to keep it light and fun. I think the fun is the side I tried to go for. In the Park Pilot genre of helicopters, it's a much less expensive investment. Mistakes don't cost you quite as much. There are some other challenges because, like I said, I like to scale helicopters, and trying to do scale in that size is very difficult because of the weight penalties and limited power we have. So that was kind of where I tried to go, is make it fun, make it educational, and show that anybody can get in there. We all had to start somewhere, whether it's airplanes, helicopters, you got to start somewhere. And I felt like my job was to show you some areas where you could start, some available products that wasn't going to break the bank, and give you a feel for being successful right from the start. So that was my tact. I'd love to see somebody come in and pick it up. They sure don't have to be an expert. You just have to be willing to kind of throw yourself out there and listen to readers and respond to the input that you get, so you know where to send the column.
Well, while you were sharing that, I quickly glanced at some of the comments, and Chris Mulcahy's on live with us. So
did I say anything about him?
So he's posted a few comments, and he wrote both the helicopter columns for quite a long time. And I first met Chris at Fly for Tots, which was a great event that I enjoyed going to. And Chris flies 3D and helicopters, and so he's been a great resource and wrote several articles. And I also want to thank, looking at the comments, there's several AMA employees that have joined us live, and I want to just say thank you to them, because they're answering questions as well and pointing things out. So my friend Kyle Jarris, who's our education director, who used to be our art director and worked on the publication, he pointed out that SIG is special interest group. So, I always want to make sure that for people that don't know, when I say SIG, it's special interest group. So Kyle, thank you so much for pointing that out. And also I want to point out that also live is our executive director, and that's Chad Budrow. And Chad, actually, for those that don't know, started in our department. He started in the publications department, and he basically launched our first digital edition, and he went to trade shows and shot video when I was interviewing companies and people. And so I worked very closely with Chad. I don't want to take all the credit, but I believe I was helpful in teaching Chad how to fly. I've given Chad some airplanes. And so, it was really exciting for us because Chad left our department to go into government relations. And he ran the government relations team for quite some time until Dave Mathewson decided to retire. And then he took over as our interim executive director, and then now as our permanent executive director. So it was exciting for us to see someone who, started with the organization and worked through the organization to become our executive director. And Chad is still very engaged in flying model aircraft. And so I've seen him on here making a few comments. So I definitely want to make it a point to thank the staff that are joining in and answering questions and providing input. And Kyle and I did a live stream about flight simulators not too long ago. And he's been doing other live streams about building aircraft with his kids and his family and with paper airplanes. And he did a Camp AMA since we weren't able to have it locally. Last week, Claire and Kyle and several staff put on a virtual camp, and it was a huge success. So, I want to just take a moment to point out all those things to say thank you to the staff for taking part in this and the other shows that we do. And hey, Jenny has just pointed out. Yeah, hi, Greg. Thanks for always being a great columnist to work with.
So thanks for being a great editor. She's the one that makes me look a lot better than I really am. She can send me the edits via email, and she doesn't say, what are you, an idiot? And she doesn't say, I thought your degree was in English. What's the matter with you? So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so Chad just says he still has the icon that I gave him. And, that icon was actually on the cover of Model Aviation. And Chad told me he was really interested in the float planes and water planes. And so I told him, I want you to have this, and it was on the cover of Model Aviation. So I'll also share a quick story that Chad owns several old Ford vehicles like Model Ts. And so I gave him a Pete and Paul, and he wanted that because of it had the engine in it from a Model T. And that came from Stevens Aero model. And he's just about to fly it. I gave it to him probably at least last year, if not before that. And he reached out to me about a week ago, and he was binding it to his transmitter, and he wanted to fly it. So, it's really great to have the support of the staff to help out with this. And, when I talk about Model Aviation and I talk about Park Pilot, whether we're talking about the print or we're talking about the digital, it takes a lot of people to put those together. It takes all the people externally, the columnists and the writers, and it takes internally all the staff, and other departments pitch in and help. So, it's really a team effort. And I was so proud. I touched on it earlier, but in case you missed it, our magazine, our redesign, won an award on Tuesday of this week. We won the Association in Media and Publishing Excel Award. We got the Silver Award, second place for best redesign. And the redesign was helped by the company Bates Creative, which is now called Beyond Definition, but back then they were Bates Creative. And they also redesigned the EAA's magazine, and they redesigned AOPA's magazine. And it was really exciting for us to have all of our ideas, and then we got all their ideas and get it. Sometimes you're too close to it and you need, some professional help. And so, I definitely want to make it a point to thank everyone who supports the magazine, supports AMA, who contributes to the magazines, and writes feature articles, who gives ideas. And again, it's at the end of the day, it's your magazine, and we want to make it the best magazine we can. And we're also trying to bring more digital content, social media, which is Ashley Rowan, and digital content. Like I said before, Matt, Dylan, Mark Benson, Aaron, all these people who work behind the scenes to bring digital content. We want to kind of try to embrace to some degree a digital first mindset and bring digital content. So, like for reviews, we used to hold the review video until the magazine went to print. And now we're putting that out there and, putting it out there first, and the review videos out there first. Hey, Steve Chow, he just posted a comment. I gotta say hi to Steve Chow because one of our topics we're going to go to in a minute is Toledo, and Steve Chow allowed me to work Toledo, my first ever Toledo. I worked in the Dave Patrick booth because Steve Chow invited me to come and work with him, who, if you don't know, Steve Chow owned Searmark and took that over from his father. And he invited me to come to Toledo and work the Dave Patrick booth, which was such a thrill because Dave Patrick models, great airplanes. I'd never been to Toledo, and it's like, hey, we want you to come to Toledo and work in the booth. So it's funny that you are, well, I appreciate, Steve, that you're on. And I was going to tell that story. I was going to tell the story about my first Toledo and the fact that I almost saw none of Toledo because, as it turned out, there was an emergency for Dave Patrick. And so the day before the show that evening, the first time I ever meet Dave Patrick, I'm told, Dave's leaving in an hour. So is learn as much as possible because you are going to run the entire booth, the entire show. So long story short, the only time I saw the show was 2 30-minute lunch breaks, one on Friday and one on Saturday. And other than that, I was in the booth. So I ate as fast as I could, and I walked like I was speed walking through the aisles as best you could, because those aisles are really, really busy and packed. But that gave me the opportunity at Toledo to meet several people like Joyce Hager and several people from AMA that I had not met before. And as it turned out, I ended up becoming an AMA employee that same year after Toledo. But at Toledo, I was not aware of this. And then since then, I've been to 12 Toledos. And so I guess it kind of makes an interesting segue to talk a little bit about Toledo. We got the sad news that the show after 65 years is no more. And I kind of wanted to, just share that for anybody that hasn't gotten that news. And it's obviously sad news. But Greg, you've gone to Toledo for several years, and you come with a group of friends, and we always meet up, and sometimes we have lunch, and we always talk. And so, tell the people, how long have you been going to Toledo, and what did the show mean to you?
Well, I think I made 25 straight years without missing it. Some of them working in booths for various magazines over the years. Some of them just walking the show to cover it. It's tremendous. You mentioned Steve too. Dave Patrick Pitts. He provided that pitch to me when I was doing a review for Model Airplane News, actually, and said, "Yeah, if you want to electrify it for your review, you can." And that's what we did. We were the first ones that electrified the Dave Patrick pitch, and it was tremendous. And Steve is the one who provided that and gave us the go-ahead. So big thanks there, because at the time it was kind of a cutting-edge thing for us. Toledo is it is the motivator for my year. To tell you the truth, we come out of winter, we hit there, flying season's starting to kick off. Of course, in North Carolina, come April, our weather's pretty nice finally. And so we're out flying. We go up there, we see friends. I've got friends, John Kauk and Jim Ryan, and those guys come from Kansas, and we all, Cincinnati, we all get together, and Don Belfort, who's a columnist for Park Pilot, and Keith Shaw is always there, and just all the people that I've known, I guess, since day one. And sometimes it's the only time of the year where the whole crowd is there together. I got to walk the show a couple years ago. We did a Facebook Live show where we walked the show and did the display models, and that is a real highlight. The competition models are just incredible to see what people do. That we tend to think of the names that we see in magazines, the top gun guys and builders, and you forget that there are everyday modelers that are just incredible. The ship modelers, when you look down on the docks they put next to the ship model, and it's got bird poop on the post, and I mean, these are the memories that come back, and I'm just going to miss seeing the people and seeing the developments. You used to go there to see the new products, different people introduced, and they would save things for introduction there at the show. It's just, if there was anything that ever rivaled the camaraderie of my military career, it's the aero modeling, but modeling career, and the showing up. It's like a reunion at Toledo every year. Yeah, I'm sad to see it end. I understand the reasons behind it and the logistics that go into such an event. But to me, it was a hallmark of our annual events.
Yeah, to me, Greg, I felt like it was a family gathering of sorts, because there were certain people there, whether it be attendees or exhibitors, that you really didn't see anywhere else. I certainly don't want to try to run down a whole list of names, but one that comes to mind, for example, is Bill Stevens from Stevens Aero Model, because he's all the way out in Colorado. So it was very rare for me to ever see Steve or to see Bill at an event. So that was perfect to catch up with him and so many people. So to me, it was kind of like a family gathering to meet up with people and celebrate aero modeling. And so, I shared, I worked the booth for Dave Patrick Models, my first Toledo, and I hardly got to see it at all. And which is okay. I mean, we didn't know that Dave had to leave, and I know Steve was shorthanded, and I was just so excited to even be there. I was like a kid in a candy store because, I would look at articles about Toledo. I would look at pictures about Toledo online. I wanted to know what the latest and greatest releases were. So to me, it was just a thrill to be there. And then the very next year, I come back working for the magazine. And at that point, I'm able to see everything because I want to take pictures and talk about new products. So it worked out. I got to work a booth and talk about Dave Patrick's models and work with Searmark and Steve. And so I'm going to ask you to tell maybe one of your fondest memories or stories, but I'm going to tell a quick story, and I'm probably going to embarrass Steve a little bit since he's on here. But I'm a little bit of a practical joker, just a little bit, and just in good fun. And so Steve took us all to Texas Roadhouse for dinner after, I think it was the first day that we worked the Toledo show. So he took all of us, the Searmark staff, and we went to Texas Roadhouse. And I'd never been to a Texas Roadhouse because we didn't have them in Florida. And so I noticed, well, it might have been when we first came or while we were seated, I noticed that it was their birthday. And so they sang happy birthday to them, and they gave them like a little piece of cake or ice cream. And so Steve, he was trying to take care of Searmark's business in California while he was in Toledo. So he had to make a phone call and talk to the people. And because of the time difference, he was able to talk to the people back in California. So he was on the phone, and he got up and he walked away from the table. And I just got this funny idea. So I walked up, I got out, I left our table for a moment, and I walked over to our waitress, and I told them that it was Steve's birthday. And it wasn't, but I told him it was Steve's birthday because he kept having to get up and leave the table. So Steve comes back to the table, and they come over and they put him in a chair that has a saddle in it. So he had to sit, in a cowboy, a saddle for a horse, and they sang happy birthday to him, and they gave him like cake or ice cream. And everyone else that worked for Searmark was kind of shocked, like, why, it's not Steve's birthday, why are we celebrating? And they thought it was funny, but they kind of thought it was they were kind of shocked. So I made it a point to owe up. As soon as the staff wished him a happy birthday, I owed up for it because I didn't want him to think anybody that worked for him for Searmark. So since I was free help, he couldn't fire me. So I figured it was a nice gesture, and at the end he actually liked it because he got a free dessert. So,
there you go.
So it's funny to share that story, knowing that Steve is online listening. So, Greg, do you have a special memory, or maybe it's a collection of memories? But is there something you might share?
Well, there's a couple. I remember the first year I can't remember who I was writing for at the time. I had made a comment in a magazine about Rich Urovich and Nick Zaroli, and I had made a comment about them, and it came out in print right before Toledo. And I can't remember what it was. It was just kind of some joking remark. Well, I didn't even think Rich Urovich read my stuff or knew who I was, but I was going through taking pictures, and all of a sudden he and Nick Zaroli, and I mean these are like gods of Top Gun, start going, oh, there's Greg Gimlick, and he said so and so about Rich, and they were going on, and they just dragged me all weekend, and I started to realize, that all these people that I've had on such high pedestals, I mean, they're just normal guys. They're modelers. They treated me like modelers. They treated me like I was one of them. I got invited out to lunch one day, and as I'm sitting there looking around the table, and we've got Keith Shaw and Tom Hunt was there, and Jim and John and Doug Ingraham, who did all the speed controls for Astro Bob, and Astro Bob was there, and we had Tom Samato from Maxim Motors, Dave Palumbo from Aviox. I think Dave Platt had joined us for lunch. I think there were about 20 of us there, and I was in awe. I sat there and I looked around that table, and I thought, what have I done to land here and be friends with these guys or have them treat me so well? And that was one of my earlier years there when I first started writing for one of the publications, and it really opened my eyes as to who's in this hobby, who we are as a whole. and just what kind of a community it was. And had I not been at Toledo, I don't know when I would have realized that, but it was a revelation to me, and it was a great opportunity.
Well, I'm definitely thankful that we've all had those opportunities, and the show's been around for 65 years, and certainly sad to see it go away, but it's great that we all were able to attend those shows. And I just saw Joyce is watching live too. She's made a few comments. She said wonderful people and mentioned she's watching. So I don't mean to embarrass Joyce in any way, but I want to share with everyone that's not aware that Joyce has actually worked for AMA for 50 years. We celebrated her 50th anniversary with AMA, which is just an amazing, feat to be with AMA for that long. And, she provides so much knowledge and experience. And all the people that you mentioned, she's worked with these people. They've been past presidents or executive directors, or they've been board members or whatnot. And, a really funny, small world kind of story, because I saw someone say it's a small world. When I was working in Florida, and I worked for MCI at one point after I got out of the military, and then I went to work later for Xerox, I worked with Joyce's best friend growing up, and her name's Linda Kidwell. And Linda Kidwell was Joyce's best friend in the world growing up. And one day, Linda saw a model airplane on my desk, and she said, "Do you fly model airplanes?" And I said, "I absolutely do." And she said, "Well, my best friend is Joyce Hager, and she's the executive director of the AMA." And I was just shocked because I had worked with Linda for so long. And, it's like small world, So when I went to Toledo, when I told the story to work the Dave Patrick booth, I introduced myself to Joyce. I'd never met her. And, but I'd read her column, and she'd been the executive director more than once. And so I introduced myself and told her that I was a coworker and friend of Linda Kidwell. So, going back to small world. So, we're getting close to the end of our show here, and we're going to have to wrap up here in a moment. But, I feel like it's kind of gone to a bit of we've kind of reminisced here at the end, and that's probably a great way to end the show, with these fond memories. And again, I'm really excited to host this show. It's a monthly show. Our next one will be on August 21st, because the show is the third Friday of the month. So the next one will be August 21st. And I'm really excited to talk to you and share with you upcoming articles in Model Aviation, or digital exclusives, or social media, or, just talk about what we're doing and have an open conversation and have community around Model Aviation and answer your questions. So I want to thank you, Greg, for coming on the show. I want to thank you for being a columnist. I want to thank you for being my friend. You've been a sounding board for me. And I want to thank you for that. I want to thank the staff for taking part in this and being part of the live chat. I want to thank Matt Reddick for doing all the work behind the scenes. I want to thank everybody that tuned in. I want to thank everyone that has supported me for 12 years. The end of last month was my 12-year anniversary with AMA. I want to thank everyone for the support of that. And Greg, before we call it a day, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I just appreciate all the readers. I appreciate the input, positive and negative. It's all good when you get input, because if it's negative, at least you know what you need to change. And I think that things are a little difficult for all of us right now, hobby-wise, industry-wise. But I don't think we're dead yet, and I wouldn't count us out. I think there are better days ahead of us than that, and I hope I'm writing for the magazine for a long time. It's the happiest I've ever been at any publication I've ever been, the best people I've ever worked with. So now I'm just tickled to death to be here. I hope the show is a success for you, and obviously whatever I can do, I'm happy to do it.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody at AMA and at that works on both of our publications to make it all happen. I'm really excited to have another show next month, and look forward to any comments that you might have after the show about guests that you'd like to see on the show. I mean, we're going to have, I want to have columnists. I want to have people who write feature articles. I'd like to have advertisers on the show and talk about their products. So anything that you'd like to see in the future or any input that you have, please comment on social media or please reach out to me or send an email. And thanks again so much for joining, either live or if you watch this after the fact. I want to say hi to my friend David Hogue. He's on, and I look forward to doing this again in a month. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great Friday and have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.